new report reveals that hundreds of thousands of Brazilians have fallen into extreme poverty under the Jair Bolsonaro government. US President Donald Trump has announced the possibility of a travel ban for people coming from Brazil, as he claims he's worried they could infect Americans. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas announced an end to all agreements with Israel and the United States in light of the Israeli government's plans to annex parts of the West Bank. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Katrina Goss. The social, political and health crisis in Brazil continues to escalate, with a new report revealing that thousands of Brazilians have fallen into extreme poverty under the Jair Bolsonaro government. Over the last 72 hours, Brazil has become the fourth hardest hit country in the world in terms of the number of COVID-19 cases reported, surpassing France, Italy and the UK. The country has officially reported over 271,000 cases and almost 18,000 COVID-19 deaths. Meanwhile, a study revealed that nearly 200,000 people have fallen into extreme poverty during the first year of the Jair Bolsonaro government. The study notes that almost 14 million Brazilians now live on less than $2 a day after enjoying better living standards and prosperity during the governments of Lula da Silva and Dilma Rousseff. Ecuadorian President Lenin Moreno announced a series of economic measures he claimed were in response to the crisis caused by the coronavirus pandemic. The measures include the closing of embassies and the reduction of diplomatic personnel in Venezuela, Mexico and Iran. This after having already eliminated over 40 ministries and public institutions. Moreno also announced that 7 state companies will be eliminated, including the railway company, state media outlets, the national airline and the post service. He didn't provide details as to whether they would be privatised or merged with other companies. Moreno's plans include a cut of $4 billion to public spending, yet there was no mention of higher corporate taxes or any other form of generating more state revenue. The moves were met with widespread criticism and protests. Ecuador has officially reported more than 34,000 coronavirus cases and almost 3,000 fatalities, although the real figures are thought to be much higher. The Medical College of Peru has called on the government to maintain the national state of emergency called in the face of the coronavirus outbreak. The Medical College of Peru called on the government to maintain the national state of emergency called in the face of the coronavirus outbreak. Hundreds of people gathered in one of the poorest neighbourhoods of the Chilean capital, Santiago, as well as in other areas of the city and the country, to protest the precarious situation they're facing in the midst of the lockdown. Demonstrators stressed that the government led by President Sebastián Piñera has failed to provide support for the most disadvantaged sectors of Chilean society, who are facing further economic hardships due to the quarantine and lack of work. The protesters were repressed by the police, who used water cannons and tear gas to disperse them. Chile remains one of the worst hit countries by the pandemic in Latin America, with more than 49,000 cases and over 500 fatalities. Representatives of the legislature of the US state of Minnesota have called for medical and scientific collaboration with Cuba to address the COVID-19 pandemic. The resolution requested that Minnesota's Governor, Tim Walz, call on the Health Department and other agencies to investigate the potential of collaboration with the island to obtain assistance and expertise for the benefit of the state's residents in the midst of the health crisis. In addition, the legislation directs the Minnesota legislature to call on Congress and the US President to lift the restrictions preventing access to the import of Cuban drugs proven to be effective in treating COVID-19. Cuba has sent 26 medical brigades to several countries across 3 continents in response to the pandemic. Venezuelan Vice President for Communications, Jorge Rodriguez, reported 21 new coronavirus cases this Tuesday. Rodriguez explained that 5 of the new cases were contact with people who had travelled abroad and 16 were locally transmitted. The latest figures bring the total registered in the country to 639. The official stressed that thanks to the measures adopted by the Venezuelan government, it's been successful in controlling the outbreak. In Uruguay, the relatives of those disappeared during the dictatorship organised a virtual march for memory, truth and justice. More in the following report.
This May 20th, for the first time in 25 years, the March of Silence, which calls for the return of those who were disappeared during the last civic military dictatorship in Uruguay, will not take place on the 18th of July Street, Montevideo's main avenue. The new times, marked by the novel coronavirus pandemic, make it impossible for a crowd to take to the streets to voice this demand. However, a virtual march will be held in which citizens will participate from their homes.
Nosotros decimos que esta marcha va a ser construcción de la gente, esta marcha.
We say that this march is going to be built by the people. People are building it, or already started building it. May has already begun and people have begun to prepare, to decorate their houses, to demonstrate in their houses with something that has to do with the disappeared, with a photo, with a daisy, with a name.
This year, the mothers and relatives of the disappeared organization called for this virtual march so that each person from their home or their neighborhood would state the name of their loved one, uploading a photo or video with the hashtag March del Silencio on May 20th at 7 p.m.
They are memory. They are present. What are they? Forced disappearance is a crime against humanity committed by the state terrorism. We still do not know where they are, and impunity continues to this day. That is why we continue to demand truth and justice, and we will always keep their memories alive.
In addition to the actions on social networks, groups have organized interventions in different parts of the country to raise awareness and continue to demand truth and justice.
There are a lot of collectives and social organizations that are undertaking different activities, from printing masks with "Never Again" to putting up balcony signs on buildings. In other words, it was decentralized. Since there was no central activity like the march, what happened is that it exploded in every corner of the country, in every collective and social organization or grassroots committee. They decided to hold their own activities.
The shows of support for the virtual march can already be seen in the streets of Montevideo. According to the relatives of the disappeared, truth is required and the guilty parties should pay for the atrocities committed. Only this way can a democratic society be built.
That is what we need to continue to develop as a truly democratic society. Democracy starts with a lot of things. Human rights is a set of things. We are part of these human rights because we demand and we want memory, truth and justice, and to know where the disappeared are, and those responsible pay for what they did.
In Uruguay, there are 195 missing detainees, in addition to dozens more in Argentina, Chile, and Paraguay. So far, some bodies buried in military units have been found sporadically. This is the case of the Communist Party members Hugo Vanessa Chavez Sousa, Eduardo Blair, Fernando Miranda, Maestro Julio Castro, and trade unionist Ricardo Blanco Valiente.
Mateo Grille, Telesur.
More stories coming up after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Amid a resurgence of coronavirus cases in several states of the US which relax social distancing measures, President Trump has issued new threats against the World Health Organization. Our correspondent Jorge Gestoso has the details.
Thank you. The cases of coronavirus are still growing in states that they were reopening their economy in an early stage. That is the case of Alabama, North Dakota, and especially in Texas. During Saturday, there were 1,800 cases in just one day. And the national level, we're talking that the cases have already passed 1.5 million and the death over 90,000, and they were expected to reach 100,000 by June 1st. The White House is still trying to blame their slow response to the coronavirus to someone else and went back to blame the CDC, the Centers of Disease Controls, saying that they were very slow in providing them with tests to see who are basically getting the coronavirus And the CDC response was, don't forget that we are a federal agency and the President of the United States is the one who has already appointed the director of the CDC. In general terms, we're talking that the economy, according to the President of the Federal Reserve, is going to continue to suffer. Jerome Powell has said that only by the end of next year we can see a real recovery of this pandemic. We'll get back to you now.
Russia has now reported the second highest number of coronavirus cases in the world after the United States. Russia has now identified nearly 300,000 cases and reported more than 2,800 COVID-19 deaths. The death toll is much smaller than that of other countries reporting a large number of cases, which was thought to be down to widespread testing, which has allowed for the identification of asymptomatic cases. Moscow continues to be the hotspot of the epidemic in the country, having reported over 3,000 cases. The United Kingdom has seen over 42,000 COVID-19 deaths, the second highest figure in the world. Despite the continued risk, the UK government is now pushing to reopen the economy and state schools. Political analyst Carlos Martinez offered his thoughts on how the government of Boris Johnson has handled the coronavirus pandemic compared to the response of the Chinese government.
China's Center for Disease Control sequenced the genome in record time, deposited it with the WHO on the 11th of January, making it available to the whole world. And then China itself imposed a lockdown on the 23rd of January. It never attempted to hide what it was doing. And indeed, lots of countries did learn from that experience and act on it in a timely manner. For example, Vietnam, for example, South Korea, Cuba, New Zealand. Britain, unfortunately, didn't. The British government knew perfectly well it was facing a pandemic, and it was planning to deal with it via so-called herd immunity, basically letting hundreds of thousands of people die. It's only because of public outrage and the intervention of some prominent scientists that the government had to change tactic. Now we're in a protracted crisis, people are dying in large numbers, and I suppose it's convenient at some level to blame China rather than face up to our own failings, but actually it's not helpful and really it's very dangerous. It's stimulating a big increase in anti-Asian racism, and it's feeding into an aggressive new Cold War strategy that's the exact opposite of the type of cooperation and coordination that we need at a global level to handle these types of crises.
The Spanish government has announced it will seek Parliament's approval to extend the state of emergency by another fortnight until June 7th. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez said he would seek an extension of around a month, but the government reduced the request to 2 weeks to secure the support of the centre-right Ciudadanos party. The government says the decree has allowed it to address the epidemic and bring down the daily number of new cases. The Spanish Health Ministry reported 63 new COVID-19 deaths in the last 24 hours, marking the third day straight that the number has been under 100. Spain has reported a total of over 278,000 coronavirus cases and more than 27,000 fatalities. And Italian authorities have announced they are ready to welcome tourists this summer, despite the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. According to the Italian Foreign Minister, the government is working on a safe and concrete plan to reopen its tourism industry to European tourists from the beginning of June. The country started reopening commercial businesses and public spaces this week, while restrictions have been lifted on movement between different regions. Italy has reported over 226,000 coronavirus cases and more than 32,000 COVID-19 deaths. Scientists at Peking University in the Chinese capital have announced the development of a promising drug to combat the novel coronavirus. Researchers at the university claim the drug can boost the immune system response to the virus. Positive results have been observed in animal tests, and the drug is expected not only to reduce the patient's recovery time, but to develop a period of immunity. According to the researchers, the drug should be available later this year.
Our team has been working day and night in search for the neutralizing antibody. Our expertise is single-cell genomics rather than immunology or virology. When we realized that the single-cell genomic approach can effectively find the neutralizing antibody, we were thrilled. We want to see this drug really benefit the whole world. So this collaboration is truly international.
And we're taking one final break now, but stay with us for more. Welcome back to From the South. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas announced an end to all agreements with Israel and the United States in light of the Israeli government's plans to annex parts of the West Bank. Speaking in Ramallah at an emergency meeting of the Palestinian leadership, Abbas announced that the Palestine Liberation Organization and the State of Palestine are absolved as of today of all the agreements and understandings with the American and Israeli governments and of all the obligations based on these understandings and agreements, including security agreements. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is pushing ahead with the annexation plans outlined in US President Donald Trump's so-called Deal of the Century or Middle East Peace Plan, where it sparked widespread international condemnation and calls to respect the two-state solution proposed as a means to bring peace to the region and ensure the recognition of the State of Palestine. Syrian citizens are facing rising prices due to US and EU sanctions, the ongoing fight against terrorist organizations, and now the coronavirus pandemic. More details in the following report.
An exaggerated price hike is overwhelming the lives of Syrians. This year, in addition to the difficulties they face in meeting their basic needs, citizens are suffering from a lack of resources to celebrate Eid, the end of Ramadan.
La fiesta del fin de Ramadán.
The blockade prevents us from importing the products we need, which cause prices to rise in all sectors, such as the health sector, which cannot import raw materials. This issue raised the prices of medicines, and also in the agricultural sector that cannot import fertilizers, which is why the prices of produce are already unaffordable.
The situation has also affected the income of vendors. Almost 10 years of war and blockade, together with the pandemic, caused the devaluation of the Syrian pound, which reduced the purchasing power of the consumers.
The main causes of this situation are the economic blockade, and the second is the merchants of the crisis, who raise prices and link them to the exchange rate against the dollar. This action hits our economy, and all attempts to tackle high inflation and boycott trading in dollars.
Among the measures adopted by the government to lower prices is the establishment of popular markets for the sale of agricultural produce without intermediaries, a measure that citizens are asking to be extended to industrial and handmade products.
Prices in this market are lower than others, but the range of products is limited, and the diversity of these products does not meet public demand. Yet we support this initiative and ask that it be made more effective. These markets were established by the government to alleviate the suffering of citizens due to rising prices. So in order to reduce prices, they adopt the mechanism of selling products without intermediaries, directly from the farmer to the consumer.
Meanwhile, despite the difficult conditions created by the economic war and the pandemic, Syrians are not giving up. Even though they consider the handling of the crisis by the authorities to be insufficient, the population continues to support the government to overcome the crisis.
South Africa remains the hardest hit country by the coronavirus pandemic on the continent, with health authorities having confirmed more than 16,000 COVID-19 cases. The Health Ministry reported 22 fatalities related to COVID-19 in the last 24 hours, bringing the death toll to 286. Western Cape Province is now the epicenter of the outbreak, having reported over 10,000 cases, representing 61% of the national total. In the midst of this situation, the authorities reported that the country is preparing to gradually lift lockdown measures while discussing which locations will remain isolated due to the epidemiological situation. The Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has reported more than 3,000 new coronavirus cases across the continent in the past 24 hours, bringing the total to over 80,000. More than 2 months after Egypt became the first country in Africa to confirm a coronavirus case, the outbreak has reached every nation on the continent of 1.2 billion people. The confirmed coronavirus death toll across Africa has now surpassed 2,800. Africa CDC figures also show that the most affected countries are South Africa, followed by Egypt with over 13,000 cases and Morocco with more than 7,000 cases. On May 13th, the first case was reported in Lesotho, until then the only African nation to have escaped the pandemic.
South Africa is also gradually scaling back its lockdown,
And Lesotho's Prime Minister Thomas Tabane has resigned, ending a political crisis surrounding allegations of his involvement in the murder of his ex-wife. Tabane, who has denied any involvement, said he was retiring due to his old age.
My fellow countrymen and women, I appear before you today to announce that the work that you had assigned me may not yet be over, but the time to retire from the great theatre of action and take leave from public life and office has finally arrived.
According to a United Nations report, torrential rains have left nearly 6,000 people homeless in southern Chad since April. A joint evaluation mission of UN agencies, non-profit groups and national authorities visited the affected provinces of Mangama and Moyanchari from April 27th to 29th, reporting that more than 62% of homes were totally or partially destroyed, forcing many families to find shelter with a relative or neighbour. According to the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, there's an urgent need for immediate action as the rainy season is approaching. Those left homeless are facing even greater risks in the face of the COVID-19 outbreak. Chad has reported 545 cases and 56 fatalities. This May 19th marks the 95th anniversary of the birth of US revolutionary and civil rights leader Malcolm X. His thoughts are perhaps even more relevant today in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, which is disproportionately affecting Black Americans. And we finish this news brief with some of Malcolm's thoughts, speaking on freedom, justice and equality. Remember, you can get all the latest news from the Global South on our website and social media. For Teddy's for English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.
Equality means the opportunity to develop all of our dormant potential, all of our dormant capability. And in developing this dormant capability, the right and the ability to stand on this earth on some land of our own and bring about a civilization and a society in which we will be completely independent, complete freedom to take care of the needs, to take care of the wants and the likes and the dislikes of our people, to establish our own nation, our own society, our own heaven, our own future. This is what we mean by freedom, by equality. And justice means as you sow, so shall you reap. If you do wrong, you'll get wrong in return. And if you do right, you'll get right in return. When you're in your own nation, in your own land, you're in a position to get justice. But when you're in another man's country, in another man's land, under another man's flag, and under another man's government, and under another man's court system, you have to look to that other man for justice, and you'll never get it. And Negroes in this country probably are authorities on that.